Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I hope everyone is doing alright this morning. Let me check my volume. I've checked with the Wi-Fi company. They're supposed to be increasing the speed on this. And so hopefully that gets rid of some of the issues that I've been having with cutoffs. That's the first point. Second point, because of everything that's been going on with the channel, I kind of got sidetracked. Guys, I still want you to send in your suggestions, meaning the patrons, on ideas for the show today. We have 2 more weekends, or 2 more weeks, when we're going to do the patron thing, patron appreciation. I appreciate my patrons all the time, but I thought it would be a nice kickstart off into maybe differences or changes in the channel by doing a patron appreciation. My wife came up with the idea, so I'm crediting her with this idea. And yeah, we're still doing the drawings for the t-shirts each week. I think we have 2 or 3 people at this point that are supposed to be getting a t-shirt. So that there's that. And there will be another drawing for it today. I have another doctor's appointment today. I won't be back home until around 5 or 6. But we can do the show once I get back home. I know I've had a lot of these. We're moving. Or we're going to... The trip is coming up. At least the trip was coming up. We need to see how that's going to go with all of the odd stuff that's been happening on Patreon and on Super Chats and Google. But nevertheless, the trip is coming up. At this point, we've already paid for the first leg of it. And so there's certain things I need to get done before I leave, and the doctor's appointment is, you can say, tied on loose edges. So when I get back home this evening from that, be a bit fatigued, but we can still do that show. So let's set that show for around 6 o'clock this evening, the patron appreciation show. So definitely, your patrons, send in what you think will be a good idea for a show. Or for that matter, we can put it around and just have us talk, whatever comes up for a conversation. Either of those is perfectly okay with me. This is patron appreciation. I'm also allowing patrons to direct this. Let's see what else. There was something else. Oh, before I get to the main thing, a slight changes to the show. With the attack on YouTube, I need to make small moves or make certain moves to the show. So 2 things that I'm going to do. I'm going to start editing the videos themselves. So adding an intro, adding like little signage that people have on some of the other videos. I'm going to start doing that myself. I will probably start doing more videos where I'm just pushing those videos up as opposed to doing those live. I was doing that yesterday. If you notice, those videos tend to be shorter. I'm doing that because I want to try to increase the subscriber count, and I want to see whether that's a method of doing that. By the same token, my patrons are not necessarily going to get shafted on this because I'm still going to do long videos, and I'm thinking about keeping those long videos for the patrons. If this is going to be a viable path, I need to figure out a way to walk that path and make it work. I don't necessarily want to shaft the patrons because the patrons are the ones that got me to this point and are keeping me intact. By the same token, I still need to grow the show, and I need to support both ends. So those are the plans up to this point. If you want to support the show has been completely demonetized at the very least up until September, and probably several weeks into September. Please feel free to donate with the link below. You can click the link in the description box, and it will take you to a point where you can essentially donate through PayPal. A little Vulcan will pop up on the screen and shake and dance and all this other stuff. So there's that. The announcements are out the way. I'm sorry this took so long for the announcements. Let's get to the main segment of the show. Let's talk about Nicaragua. Now, I've avoided talk about Nicaragua, but one of my subscribers kind of pointed out, hey, I'm from South America, and you never talk about South American issues. Why don't you want, could you do a show about Nicaragua? Let's do a show about Nicaragua. Now, I'm going to take the position that I am sitting on the moon, and I am just looking at the events unfold on Earth as it revolves. That I'm not tethered to any particular nation or any particular nation state to the degree that I can untether myself to those things. And I'm going to look at it from that perspective and that point of view. From a historical angle and from a political angle. Not using while acknowledging that media, let's say, is a weapon in the politics of Nicaragua. Let's use it. Let's say it in those terms. I want to start here. Do you remember? I know we're talking about events that are folding in Nicaragua right now, but how do you talk about events unfolding in Nicaragua right now if you don't have the historical context? Do you remember this? Gently old chap.
Fellow Americans, I have spoken to you from this historic office on many occasions and about many things. The power of the presidency is often thought to reside within this Oval Office. Yet it doesn't rest here. It rests in you, the American people, and in your trust. Your trust is what gives a president his powers of leadership and his personal strength. And it's what I want to talk to you about this evening. For the past 3 months, I've been silent on the revelations about Iran. And you must have been thinking, well, why doesn't he tell us what's happening? Why doesn't he just speak to us as he has in the past when we've faced troubles or tragedies? Others of you, I guess, were thinking, what's he doing hiding out in the White House? Well, the reason I haven't spoken to you before now is this. You deserve the truth. And as frustrating as the waiting has been, I felt it was improper to come to you with sketchy reports or possibly even erroneous statements.
That's the Gipper. For those of you who may be younger than I am, I'm pretty ancient, even though I don't necessarily look it. Black don't crack. That geriatric, that senile geriatric, is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, in this address, is looking into the American public and telling the American public that he was involved in a massive scandal and a cover-up that Reagan, the Gipper, should have been perp walked for and spending the remaining of his years dealing with Alzheimer's in a federal prison. That's not what took place. The presidency at this point is against the law, was above the law. The Gipper had been selling weapons to Iran and taking the money or part of the money from those and diverting that money to the Contras who were fighting the Sandinistas. Now, the Sandinistas was a government that took power, I think it was in 1979, taking down the dictatorship of, I think it was called Somoza. Somoza? Yeah, the Somoza dictatorship. Reagan framed this to the American public as if it was freedom fighters, as if this was the new George Washington, that they were fighting, in order to save Nicaragua. It was nonsense. Reagan was just was a capitalist. And these forces, they were socialist forces that ultimately wanted to have a more fair, more just society. Reagan was against. This is the same person that says socialized medicine was akin to communism. So understand the quantity to which you are dealing with. Congress told Ronald Reagan no. They told Ronald Reagan no on multiple occasions, which is why Ronald Reagan was doing this through the CIA and through shadowy means. Reagan got caught. Reagan got caught. Now, this became this big thing of the Iran-Contra affair, which is pretty amazing today, seeing as Obama was doing something similar to some degree in the open, and nobody cared. It wasn't a scandal at all. We fund opposition groups in all sorts of nations all the time. Ultimately, this used to be done by the CIA, but now this is done through organizations, through NGOs that we, to some degree, direct. Democracy, what is it called? Democracy DEA, or Democracy for America, or what is the name of it? National Endowment Agent. National Endowment Association is one of them. But there's several. It's groups that have funding that would be in a country under humanitarian grounds, but fund opposition forces in those countries based upon the prodding of right-wing elements. So it's not just an innocuous organization that's there to assist. It's there with an agenda that pushes this kind of capitalistic agenda. Nicaragua is just one of them. Mongolia was another one, but you have them all throughout the world in this case. Reagan gets caught. In Reagan getting caught, and we can go to PBS. This is not controversial at all. Battling Cuban-backed Sandinistas, the Contras were, according to Reagan, the moral equivalents of the founding fathers. Under the so-called Reagan Doctrine, the CIA trained and assisted this and other anti-communist insurgencies worldwide. Worldwide. First Democratic, in 1982, so First Democrats passed the Bolin Amendment, which restricts the CIA and the Department of Defense operations in Nicaragua. Specifically, in 1984, a strengthened Bolin Amendment made support almost impossible. Reagan ignored this. Reagan did this despite the embargo. I'm putting this in. Discovered that on $12 million of the $30 million of the Iranians reportedly paid had reached the government coffers. The unknown Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North and the National Security Council explained the discrepancy. He had been diverting funds from the arms sales to the Contras with the full knowledge of the National Security Advisor, Admiral John Poindexter, and with the unspoken blessing, he assumed, of President Reagan. I love the way they use the word assumed. They don't want to implicate the president, so it's assumed. The president is never in the loop on it, even though the president is always in the loop on it. So let's keep going. So fast forward for a moment to today. Nicaragua in turmoil. Now, you're like, well, wait a minute. Okay, so what happened? This government was relatively stable. Now, the Sandinistas get taken out of power. The Sandinistas, however, Ortega gets back into power in 2007. Now, this has been somewhat of a stable rule that the Sandinistas have presided over, increases in public health, hands down. But you can understand, like any group that focuses on the idea of the workers and the poor and the masses, there is somewhat of a backlash. Now, the oddity of this, like I said, this government has been relatively stable. There's all of a sudden been this major backlash, this uproar. That's the way I heard of it. Now, students flip out and start to protest. The odd part about this is what the students, children, were protesting was pension cuts, like retirement stuff. Why were students protesting pension cuts? This is just bizarre. Now, the pension cuts themselves were a respond offer, meaning it wasn't even an offer directly from the government itself. It was the government responding to what the business community wanted, which were deeper cuts. This sparked off these massive protests where cops were killed and where protesters were killed. Now, all the media and the way that the media reports the story in the United States is that the government is this authoritarian government that has been putting his boot and fist down on the public. The public, for the most part, has been blameless lilies, silently protesting, and they've just been struck down by these angry government forces. That's the way the reporting has gone in the West, in our countries, in the United States, and in, I would imagine, some of the other places, but definitely in the United States. That this government, that the Ortega government, Daniel Ortega, that his government has been beating, killing, torturing, maiming, and just striking down otherwise innocent bystanders and protesters. The reality of this is a little bit more complicated, which is why I find this story to be interesting and why I kind of want to talk about it. With your understanding of stories that have taken place in Syria, apply the same similar understanding to the story that's taken place here. I watched a debate between Max Blumenthal and Dr. Murray Ellsberg, Global Women's Institute at George Washington University. Great debate. I came away from the debate with similar thoughts as I have in other countries, which was this. All governments are corrupt. So telling me that a government is corrupt doesn't tell me anything. Do you honestly believe that the people that you have in power now are functioning at the behest of the people, of the public? Or do you believe they're functioning at the behest of the people who are giving them money? Take a look at the Democratic Party in Hawaii and the story that was reported on the Intercept with essentially medical companies bribing politicians. And with the politicians saying one thing to the public and saying another thing on the documents themselves when they had the opportunity to sign for the lobbyists saying, I support this, 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 and this. What they're telling the lobbyists they support was different than what they told the public they were supporting. What do they say in these private rooms when they know that there are millions of dollars at stake? That's corruption. That's open bribery on our particular politicians. Now, apply this lens for the moment for other countries around the world. If somebody says, well, that country is corrupt, what does it mean when you say another country is corrupt in the context of your own country? It doesn't mean anything. So, corrupt, yes, agreed. But that's a different thing on whether or not what this is and what is taking place in Nicaragua. I would argue to you that in the same thing that they were doing back during the Reagan era, trying to create a coup, I would argue that this is similar, somewhat of a soft coup. No, it's not overt in the way that they were going about it from the standpoint of Reagan, but are they putting resources into destabilizing Nicaragua? Yes. Did Donald Trump, or is Donald Trump in the United States positioning itself with sanctions that makes Nicaragua's plight more chaotic and more difficult? That answer is yes. Both of those things are true. What's taking place in Nicaragua is not necessarily taking place purely in a sandbox in its own dimension. There are external factors at play, just like there were external factors at play in Syria. Let's move past that part for a moment. The government itself may be corrupt, just like other governments are corrupt. The people in Nicaragua, some of them may have had real grievances. And those real grievances may have been expressed at some point in either protests or in people pushing back against the government. That may be true. It is also true that there are some people that are part of the Sandinista movement itself that are turned somewhat against this government. That is also true. The calls for the person Daniel Ortega to step down, use that in the context of your own government. If you told Donald Trump to step down, would he? If you told Bush to step down, would he? Bush had 30% support. Would he have stepped down? The answer is no. So the idea that somebody in another government will step down just routinely because there are protests, again, is a little weird to me, and I don't quite understand how Americans think that. It's almost as if we think those governments are not real in comparison to our own government, which we consider to be real. If we care about our national sovereignty, you would imagine that the people in Nicaragua will also care about their national sovereignty. In this situation, we are getting news, and it is hard to know what part of the news is a certain degree of propaganda from a vantage point of the United States versus what, in fact, is actually taking place and the level of calamity that is taking place in Nicaragua. The death totals that they give are total death totals, not the number of death totals that were from the protesters, because these protesters were not just lilies. There can be two things that are true at once, or three things. There could have been corruption in the government, meaning the government could be corrupt. There could have been actual protests against that government, meaning people wanting their government to change. People protest governments all the time. They have it in France, they have it in the United States, they have it in the UK. All countries have protests against their governments. That's not necessarily special. But the third point is also true. There could be foreign intervention that's making this worse. In the interview, or in the back and forth in the debate, they bring up a woman named Danielle Vescala. And she mentions that there was real student protests, but at some point in the protests, you have people with guns and weapons that came over to take over of the protests. So it wasn't the government going just against these nonviolent students, it was the government also going against armed militias themselves. Now, whether Ortega was paying armed militias themselves, it's possible. Yes, maybe. But let's not pretend that other countries, even some of the right-wing governments that are in South America themselves, won't necessarily supporting elements in that government that were more violent, or not in the government, opposition elements that were more violent, that may have been part of gangs, that may have had weapons, that were, based on Blumenthal's own reporting, who was there burning people alive and destroying cooperatives. I'm making a point to you that the story that we're getting from the West is constraining the narrative without necessarily giving a full picture It makes it look as if the government is taking certain actions, but that there is no response to propagate the actions. I'm saying the story is more well balanced than that. The fact is, opposition forces had been ransacking hospitals. They had been ransacking cooperatives, Sandinistas, or edifices of the Sandinistas, being these cooperatives. They were also going on killing campaigns where they were doing assassinations. Like, this is from Blumenthal's own reporting, when he was at the scene talking to the people who were there themselves being terrorized by opposition groups. There are wealthy interests in Nicaragua, and they would like to get their hands back on the levers. To some degree, you can make an argument that this goes into this kind of capitalistic versus more of a fair societal argument. This doesn't say that the Sandinista government didn't necessarily have problems and everything else. I don't necessarily doubt that there were excesses in the way that they went about their affairs, either in brutality, either in maybe shooting, either maybe even being somewhat repressive. I'm just saying the coverage on this has been remarkably unbalanced, and that the reality of it is that the opposition forces were being supported by external elements. If you had Russia and China, and you found out that Russia and China were supporting elements in your society that was stopping traffic and bringing that system to a crawl, either, let's say strikes all throughout the country, let's say killing certain people in the country, let's say kidnappings, all of these things was bringing your country to a crawl. And let's say you knew they were putting hundreds of millions of dollars into that process. How would you think of that? And if you were part of the population, what would you think of that? What would you want your police to do? What would you want your nation to do? What would you get behind? And not just that, would you be okay with those foreign powers investing money into material? I guess I'm saying, if you had outside elements dumping a bunch of money into organizations inside your country in order to bring your country to a crawl, this is not media at this point. This is weapons, munitions, people, etc., taking over what was actual protests. I'm saying this is a situation in Nicaragua. They count the death toll as if it's, the government is doing all of it. It's not that simple. So the summary of Nicaragua is a little bit of both. It's, yeah, there have been excesses from the standpoint of the government, but by the same token, the forces that have been pushing and the opposition were not necessarily playing with clean hands. It may have started as something real, but what it became was something where other countries that have their own interests at heart, including the United States, took what might have started as an original protest as a way to try to do a soft coup to get somebody else that they wanted that was more in line with their own wants. The same thing happened in Brazil. So this is not necessarily like, oh God. Yeah, the same thing happened in Brazil with Lula. And if I'm not mistaken, they're trying to put that cat in jail in order to prevent him from running again, attacking the Workers' Party in that particular country. So that's my summary of Nicaragua. Like I said, I have people who are on my channel who subscribers who live in South America. So if I've gotten some of this wrong and if I've messed up on this, please let me know. I do think to some degree this is kind of one of the things that Max Blumenthal makes clear is that in one of the schools that were ransacked, you would have people coming from other neighborhoods that are more wealthy coming into the poor neighborhoods, running roughshod over those poor neighborhoods, destroying those poor neighborhoods. So the picture is not all of one and everything of the other. The picture is a little bit more gray and bleak. And it's somewhat unclear from where we are exactly what the hell is going on in Nicaragua. Let's see. Average Citizen. Great graphics and research on this one. Ah, thank you, Average Citizen. I appreciate that. I try. Some of this stuff I knew once you get into like details about the Sandinistas. My knowledge of it starts to wane off. Looking at the news coverage of this, it is magnificently one-sided, though. It's fucking amazing how one-sided the coverage is. Oh, right here. Bold like a leopard. So, CIA supplies people with mortars made out of PVC pipes. So here's the thing. I don't doubt that some of the people who are there are legit. I don't doubt that at all. But my point is, it's not all of one and none of the other. That's what I'm getting at. You will have people making pipe bombs and all this other stuff, especially if there are people who are joining the protests and believe the cause is just. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the resources or that outside governments and outside interests wasn't necessarily adding their support to make this worse. That's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at. We've been doing this all over the world. I don't understand why this is all of a sudden this kind of dramatic thing that is taking place here. Trump is actively using the United States government to put sanctions on Nicaragua. Why are we putting sanctions on Nicaragua? That's none of our business. It's none of our business. If the people of Nicaragua wants to change the government of Nicaragua, that's for them. It is not for me or anybody else in the United States to make the determination of who that person is. Full stop. Full stop. And this idea of Catholics choosing is also weird. The Catholic government is also, not Catholic government. Catholics have also added to this in some odd way where they've become a strange power broker in the whole affair. All of this is strange. All of this is strange. You have kids fighting over pensions. This is bizarre. Okay, cool with the PVC pipe, right? This is what you're missing. It's not... I don't live there, so I don't have any feelings about it. I have no tether to it. I look at this from the standpoint of a cause and effect. If the government is doing something that the people don't like, would the people push back? Yes. Would the people protest? Yes. Does that mean that there aren't other elements emboldening and pushing the people in regards to the amount of fire that's being pushed and fueled into their protests? Yes, those people can also be fueled and being pushed into their protests. Both of those things are true. We've done this in operations all across the world, be it Afghanistan, dealing with the Russians, meaning Taliban fighters. I guess Twitter, we tried to do the same thing on Twitter. With the social media, the United States created a social media account with the idea of getting the Cubans to create a revolution against their government after they were going to get sufficient numbers. We do this. I don't understand why you're so shocked by this. Fletcher Daniels, sorry, not as well informed on this, but my minimal research seemed to suggest favor current leader, and it's the United States that yet again wants regime change. Yeah, they do. Educate me, folks. Yeah, they do want regime change. This is my point. Donald Trump is actively seeking regime change. So I don't quite understand why this is shocking. The demands for the people was for Ortega to step down. That is literal. We want you to leave. We want a different regime. I don't understand why this is controversial. Don't know why this is controversial. This seems to be openly what they're talking about. The U.S. tried the same playbook action against Daniel Ortega in 1983. Yeah, there we go. Also, the same tactics were used in Venezuela or used in Nicaragua. There we go. That's kind of my point. We do this. Right now, they're putting resources behind, what is the MEK? MEK has little to no support in Iran. Do you think that stops members of our government backing this right-wing terrorist religious fanatic organization? No, it doesn't stop them from backing them at all. Even in events talking about they're going to be dancing in Tehran on 2019. This has become the modus operandi from the standpoint of regime change. So, I'm going to leave this here because 30 minutes, Reagan's playbook. Yeah, they even called it the Reagan Doctrine. The Reagan Doctrine. At this point, this is just the American president's doctrine to essentially change regimes or countries or governments in any country it deems fit. I don't quite understand how Americans get the rationale that it's their say-so, or is their right. Maybe right is the wrong word. But it's an odd quirk or idiosyncrasy that is somewhat of a deadly one from the standpoint of people around the world. But it's an odd idiosyncrasy to believe that you have a right to say what takes place in another country that you don't particularly live. Especially when, you know, all of us, look, we're all part of a human community. So yes, there's that. But we're intervening in a country, and not for the best. That's all I'm saying. We're, to some degree, assisting in a certain amount of havoc and chaos that's being taking place in that country. And it has gone back to the 1980s, apparently. So, from a historical context, if we've aided and assisted in trying to topple this country once, are you shocked that we will be assisting again? You shouldn't be. If we've openly stated that we wanted the person to leave, why are you shocked that we're trying to change the governments of that country? Also, we are putting sanctions on Nicaragua. That's not something that's conjecture. That's something that we are doing. And it is true that there may have been problems with the government. By the same token, it is simultaneously true, and both things need to be kept in your head at the same time, that there are outside governments that are right-wing that don't necessarily like the way this government operates, and they're attempting to change it. They're using this chaos as an opportunity to instigate their own politics into the affairs of this nation. Same thing in Syria, same thing in Venezuela. Same tactic. So, I'll leave this here. Innocent people still died as 9/11 becoming, regardless of propaganda. Yeah, people still died. Keith Durant, it's the Reagan doctrine because he invented the National Endowment for Democracy. Oh, I see. Look how many people, millions, they spent overthrowing the country. I see. Well, I kind of said before that all of those millions were supposed to come from Iran, and instead Reagan diverted them to Nicaragua. So I didn't realize he was the creator of the National Endowment for Democracy. Yeah, I didn't realize he was the creator of it. But I mentioned it in this piece as one of the organizations that used to be essentially the events or the behaviors of the organization used to be essentially what the CIA used to do. So I will end this here. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through Patreon. And Average Citizen, thank you very much. I appreciate your contribution. They've demonetized the entirety of the channel, and kept my money for July, so every bit of support helps. Thank you very much. All right, guys. I'll see you shortly.